Good evening, everyone. My name is Christy. I'm part of the Student Doctor Network team here. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us this evening. Tonight, we're really excited to have with us Dr. Lina Mehta and Mr. Christian Essman from the admissions office at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. They're here to talk with us about the ins and outs of applying to medical school. Dr. Lina Mehta, MD, is the Associate Dean for Admissions at Case and is an Associate Professor of Radiology with a specialty concentration in nuclear medicine at University Hospital's Case Medical Center. She has served in both of these roles for many years and enjoys the intersection of medical education and clinical medicine as it helps to provide perspective on today's medical landscape. Dr. Mehta serves on many national committees and is a well-known speaker. Mr. Christian Essman is the Director of Admissions at Case. Mr. Essman has served in this role since 2005 and oversees all aspects of the admissions process, including outreach and recruitment activities, application processing and review, the interview process, and also provides some pre-medical advising. Thanks so much to both of you guys for being here this evening. We'll start tonight with a presentation on the insider secrets of medical admissions, and then we'll have Q&A at the end with whatever time we have left. Throughout the presentation, if you have questions, you can submit them in the questions box in the control panel on the right of your screen. We'll get to as many of those as we can after the presentation. So thanks again for joining us, and from here I will turn things over to our experts.
Thanks, Christy. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. As Christy indicated, I'm Lina Mehta, Associate Dean for Admissions at Case Western Reserve School of Medicine. And with us on the line, of course, is Christian Essman, our Director of Admissions. Christian, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name is Christian Essman, and thanks for joining us. The information we're going to share with you tonight is also being recorded. You'll see that on some of these slides that we go through is a fair amount of information. We're going to try to go through this efficiently as we can, so we do leave time at the end for questions that you may have, so that way you can go back. If you missed some things on the slides, you can go back and rewatch it and collect some of that after we do the webinar tonight. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Mehta and kind of go behind the curtain for a little bit, and I'll rejoin you guys in a little bit.
Christian and I are going to be trading off the presentation. As Christy indicated, tonight we're going to be talking with you about some insider secrets of medical school admissions, what you should know before you apply. Some of the information that we share with you tonight may be facts and tidbits of which you're already aware, but hopefully we're going to be presenting a few new things too. Either way, we think that what we're going to share with you tonight will be a very good springboard for you as you move forward throughout your application process. One disclaimer, the information that we share with you tonight is going to be common to most, but not all medical schools. We're trying to give you definitely a global view, but we can't speak for everyone. So we want you to make sure that you do some individual fact checking before you decide the schools to which you're going to be applying. So let's start our presentation off with the first formal step in the application process. It's not the first step overall, however, that requires some back work, which I'm going to touch on in a moment. But the first formal step is called AMCAS, the American Medical College Application Service. For those of you who are fairly close to applying to college, you may remember your undergraduate common application. This is analogous. In AMCAS is lots and lots of information which you'll document and describe, ranging from biographical information, where were you born, when were you born, who were your parents, where were they born, where did they go to school, what's their educational level, do you have brothers and sisters, how old are they, and so on. You'll also document your entire academic history, and we'll have formal transcripts sent to the AAMC, to AMCAS, who will have them verified. You'll also document extracurricular activities and write a personal statement. Christian will spend a little bit more time later in the presentation talking in more detail about those. You'll also designate who your letter recommenders are going to be, and you'll also select the medical schools to which you're going to be applying. There's a lot of information inputted into AMCAS, so much so that AMCAS provides a 90-page guide to help you through the process. I highly recommend you pay that guide a visit well in advance of your application deadlines. So let me take you now for a quick peek behind the curtain and show you what we see at Case Western. Can you show the next slide, Christian? Next slide, please. Okay, seem to be having a little technical difficulty there. Okay, great. Thanks, Christian. So the next slide here is what the MCAS looks like in our display at our School of Medicine. I know a lot of other medical schools are using this same display. So at the top, you can see the primary applicant information where your name is listed, your AMCAS ID number. Moving down to general biographic information, you can see your birth, we can see your birth date, your gender, did you get a fee waiver, what's your citizenship, and if you're not a U.S. citizen, what's your visa status. We can see if you've been convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor, if you were in the military with an honorable or dishonorable discharge, if you live in an underserved area, and if you had an institutional action. Now, this is an actual anonymized front sheet from a candidate who matriculated with us in 2013. He did have an institutional action, so an institutional action is not a deal breaker, depending on when it happened, the severity, whether it was a one-off, and according to many other things that underlie it. But do keep your nose clean. The cleaner your nose is, the better things will go for you. In the next boxes in the middle, we see the primary undergraduate institution. The student went to Miami University. It shows the dates from which he matriculated to expected graduation. He was a dual major in econ and biochem. In the next right box is the highest degree school. If our student had gone on to get a master's degree or a JD or an MBA or a PhD, we would have seen that information listed in that box. As we move down to the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the GPA breakdown. It's broken down into multiple different points. Any college level class you've ever taken in your entire life, even if it was in high school, is listed here, hence the HS nomenclature. Our student here took 2 college level classes during high school, happily got a 4.0 in each one, and that gets averaged into his cumulative AMCAS GPA. From there, the grades are broken down into freshman year, sophomore year, and junior year, and then are further broken down into biology, chemistry, physics, and math, all others, and then the total GPA. Moving over to the right, we see his MCAT, which we've anonymized, but we can see the date he sat for it. We can see if it was a standard or non-standard administration, i.e., did he get accommodations. We can see that it was computer-based, and when he took it, there was a writing sample, so the score would have been there. We can see the score broken down into verbal reasoning, physical science, writing sample, and then below that, kind of cut off from my screen, is biological science, and we can see the percentiles. If he'd taken more than one MCAT, we would have seen that listed, and we would have been able to scroll down to see each and every one. Okay, let's move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about your GPA. As I just mentioned, any college level class you've ever taken in your entire life will be included in your AMCAS GPA. So a question we frequently get is, will the GPA on your college transcript be the same as your AMCAS GPA? The answer, my answer, is not necessarily, but AMCAS's answer is it's almost always going to be different. Why is this? Well, first off, AMCAS converts and standardized grades into a more homogeneous form that we can compare students across a broader landscape. Then, as I indicated, all college level classes that you've ever taken, including high school, community college, summer courses you may have taken at a different institution than your home institution, will be counted. In addition, allopathic medical schools do not, well, AMCAS for us does not include grade replacement. So if you took a class in your freshman year and you got a D, and retook it in your junior year and got an A, your college may purge the first and factor in only that second one, whereas AMCAS will count both. As an FYI, osteopathic schools do accept grade replacement. If you fall into any of these atypical situations with other college classes outside of your home institution or grade replacement, there's an AMCAS grade conversion guide that can be found online. In it, you can plug in all of your college grades, including the outliers, and you can see what your GPA will look like when you apply to medical school. The next slide. Next slide, please. The next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about the MCAT. As I'm sure all of you are aware, The MCAT is changing. The last date for the current version is January 23rd, 2015. As you can imagine, there's not a lot out there yet in terms of resources. Well, there is, but not as much as we'd like. But the most reliable resources right now can probably be found through the AAMC and through the Khan Academy, with whom the AAMC is actually partnered. So some common questions we get about the MCAT are listed here. Can you submit an application without an MCAT score? You absolutely can, but you will not be reviewed by a school until the MCAT populates because, of course, your application is not yet complete. Reasons that people would do this would be so that you can get your application completed in a timely fashion, so that the only piece that's yet missing is your MCAT score. We're frequently asked how medical schools feel about multiple MCAT attempts. Aim to take it once. It's a high-stakes test. Take it when you're in peak fighting shape. If, despite your best attempts, you took it in the best conditions you could, you have to retake it a second time, no great shakes. We see second MCATs all the time. Third time, we start to question, and fourth time, we really question. So you really want to take the MCAT when you're best prepared. If you wake up the morning of the test with a migraine or you've had a GI flu the night before, reschedule it. If you've taken the MCAT multiple times, medical schools will consider your scores in different ways. The majority of us will just simply take your most recent score. Some will do what they say is a summed score or super score. We'll take the best from each attempt, each subsection from each attempt. Beginning in 2015, virtually all U.S. medical schools will accept, I think all now, will accept the new version of the MCAT. Most will accept the old version of the MCAT, but the question is for how long? There's an online resource with which many of you are probably familiar, the MSR Medical School Admissions Requirement Book, that will list all medical schools and what their approach is to the new MCAT. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So prior to AMCAS, there are other things that you really need to think about. Medical schools are looking for well-rounded people. There's not one extracurricular activity that schools need to see, although there's probably a hidden search for medically related experiences. This could manifest as physician shadowing, hospital volunteerism, hospice work, needle exchange programs, free clinics, and the list goes on. The reason we want you to get these experiences is not because we expect you to know how to take out a gallbladder or put in a chest tube before you get to medical school. We'll teach you how to do that. But it's because we want you to really understand what you're getting yourself into. We want to de-glamorize the practice of medicine. We don't want your only view of medicine to be what you see on TV, because as you're probably well aware, that usually in no way, shape, or form resembles life. So we want you to understand the highs and the lows of medicine. We want you to know what the warts are to make sure that those are ones with which you can cope. Outside of that, get involved with things that interest you. We don't ask you to get involved with extracurricular activities because we're mean and nasty and we want you to use up all your free time. We know that getting involved outside of the classroom will give you a whole broad set of tools that you may not otherwise have. In the course of getting involved outside of the classroom, you may learn some leadership skills. You may learn to lead. You may learn to deal with peers. You may hone your skills of conflict negotiation. You'll be able to time manage. You may broaden your view of the global landscape. You will learn a variety of different skill sets that will make you a much more effective and functional physician. So get involved with things that appeal to you. Next slide, please. One thing to think about that is sort of unpleasant, I guess, is how much it costs to apply to medical school. We talked to several students, many students, in our offices over the years and came up with an average of what it may cost you to apply to medical school. After you take your MCAT, you buy the relevant guidance materials, you apply through AMCAS, you pay for secondary applications, you get 8 interviews, congratulations. You fly to half, you drive to half, you buy a suit, you get some tailoring, you get some luggage, suitcases are expensive, and so on. Your cost could be as high as $6,000. Now that MCAT prep course is in blue. We don't care how you study for the MCAT. It's entirely up to you. If you're able to study on your own without blowing that much cash in a review course, then by all means do, which of course will shrink your dollar amount there at the bottom. But it is expensive to apply for medical school. That's not something you can add to your financial aid package. That's something that somebody who loves you is either going to pay for or you're going to float on a credit card. So make sure you're in peak fighting shape. Not only can it be psychologically debilitating and demoralizing to apply unsuccessfully, but it can also be very expensive as well. Next slide, please. Plan ahead as you apply. Don't wait until deadlines. Apply early. You can begin submitting your MCAS application typically in early June. You can start working on it in May. And July 1st is the first date that we can begin receiving verified MCAS applications. Do not wait until deadlines to submit your primary or secondary applications. We have deadlines because we have to draw the line somewhere. Our primary deadline is November 1st. Our secondary deadline is December 15th. If you wait for those, the likelihood of getting an interview decreases precipitously. So apply early. What does early mean? Well, when I started in the admissions office 10 years ago, early was around October. But more and more students listened to our apply early mantra, and early has become earlier. Shoot to get everything completed by mid to late August, if at all possible. Next slide, please. Take time to reflect. Before you apply and at the time of application, think about why you're applying to medical school. What's taking you to the point of getting there? Christian's going to spend some time with you on the personal statement and filling out your extracurricular activities, both of which should be based on reflection. Think again about the pros and cons of a career in medicine. Next slide, please. And also reflect on your competitiveness as an applicant. There is a lot of data available at the AAMC.org, American Association of Medical Colleges, oversees the entire application. There'll be lots of data there that show GPA of applicants and matriculants and MCAT scores are the same. So assess yourself against those tables and assess your competitiveness. I'm going to turn it over to Christian now, who will present to you some nuts and bolts regarding the application process. Take it away, Christian.
All right, I'm back. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of the segments of the application, a couple of the components that Dr. Mehta spoke about. The first one is the personal statement. This part of the application seems to cause a lot of angst for applicants, and we get it. It's a hard component to approach because you're basically given a blank piece of paper or Word document to tell us about who you are. So here's why it's important. It's one of the few parts of the application you actually have control over. It's not based on test scores or other people's perceptions of you. It's a place where you can make a case for your candidacy, where you can help us maybe connect the dots of your journey to where you've gotten to today, where now you're in front of an application to medical school. And it's also a place where you can provide some personality to your application. There's a lot of data that you're inputting in this application which can make it very sterile. So this is where you can kind of let your personality kind of ooze through the application. But here's now why it's not the most important. It's only one part of a very large application. You can see the components, the sections that we can tab through the AMCAS application. It's one part. And also, the reason why it's not the most important is that, quote, that the best essay doesn't always guarantee an interview or an acceptance. And so you have to be really, conscious about when you're approaching this, that just because you write a Pulitzer Prize-winning personal statement doesn't guarantee you the interview. So that's why this is difficult to write. So one of the common questions that we get is, what's the worst personal statement you've ever read before? And there's very few that really make the hair in the back of your neck stand up. And like Dr. Mehta, I've been doing this for a number of years now too. I'm going on my 10th year now, and so we've read thousands of these. So let me tell you about some things to avoid. Just a few. I'm going to hit a few highlights here. Don't be overly dramatic. This is not a novel. This is a statement about who you are and where you've come from and where that fire is coming from inside you to want to go to medical school. Don't brag about your intelligence. We can see your academic breakdown. The one about overusing the letter I sounds a little odd, but if every sentence starts with the letter I, it just jumps off the page. There needs to be some rephrasing going on. Skipping down is spelling or grammatical errors. You don't want your work to look sloppy, and so please pay a lot of attention to punctuation and using excellent grammar. And this is not a place also to start using your new stand-up comedy routine. Know your audience. Not everybody has a good sense of humor, so sometimes these statements fall flat when people try to be too funny. And finally, writing with a thesaurus at your side. You don't need to use 50-cent words. It's actually kind of annoying if we have to look up what the word means because it's not a generally used word in the normal vernacular of a student or a clinician. And so it's kind of interesting that if we bring them in for an interview, if they don't talk like that, don't use those words in their general vocabulary, then it comes off looking a little suspicious. So finally, above all, use paragraphs. You'll see when you get the personal statement instructions in front of you on your screen, you're given 5,300 characters to create your personal statement. And if you can use characters to create paragraphs, please do that. It makes it much easier to read, because if you don't use that or you don't follow AMCAS's instructions for how to upload your personal statement, all this work that you put into it is one big block of text, which makes it very difficult to read when you're sitting at night reading these at all hours of the day and night, and now you lose the flow of the personal statement because you don't have the natural breaks from the paragraphs. So just keep that in mind. What about special situations? People often ask us, I had a really bad semester, a really bad year. Should I talk about it in my personal statement? We advocate that, don't ask us to discredit them or don't count that semester, that 1 year that I was ill. But, give a nod to the situation, but then move on and say, give a little bit of context to what happened that semester or that year, but then move on. Talk about what you've done since then, how you've changed, how you've improved. And the other thing about life challenges, one of the sub questions that they give you in the personal statement is tell them about any life journeys or challenges you faced. These are worth stating because it provides a context to your life or journey, but don't write about things you're not comfortable discussing in person. If it's a sensitive topic, just keep in mind that everything that you put in your application is fair game, except for the letters of recommendation. That stuff is fair game to discuss during interviews. So if it's kind of an emotionally charged type of situation that you don't want to discuss with somebody, then don't have to write about it. You don't have to bare your soul to everybody. And again, know your audience. So just kind of keep that in mind. This shouldn't be a therapy essay. The work and activities section is next. We get a lot of questions about this too. What should I put in my work and activities section? AMCAS gives you up to 15 fields to place in there, things that you're doing extracurricularly. This can be stuff that's medically related or non-medically related. And you can see the laundry list of just some of the things that you can list. Everything from work history, which we think is really important. It kind of helps us fill in the blanks or fill in the gaps when we see that somebody hasn't been involved in a lot of activities. Tutoring, teaching assistant, volunteering, research, awards and scholarships, organizational memberships, travel experiences, hobbies and interests. We want to know it all. So it's basically, again, a blank slate for you to fill in to tell us what you've been doing outside the classroom. And this kind of goes into my next slide. Keep records. Document everything. If you're a freshman, start keeping a portfolio. If you're a junior, go back and start documenting things that you've been involved in. You're going to thank yourself down the road when you get ready to apply to medical school, and you have to provide so much information about each one of those activities. So if you take the time now to think about those contact names and their contact information for that pre-med club that you're in, how many hours you participated in it. You have to give us a total hours. And then start documenting what your role was, any stories that came out of that. If you were on executive board, you guys had some conversations that people didn't like your ideas, and so you kind of work through that. And write those stories down, because you're going to have to reflect on these things and share some of these stories. And I'll talk about, or Dr. Mehta is going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about the secondary essays down the road, where you might have to recall some of these situations that you've been involved in. Again, I think you're going to really thank yourself down the road if you take the time now to write some of these reflections and some of these stories down that'll help you remember situations down the road that you're going to have to write about. Ways to do that, you can do it old-fashioned paper and pencil, but there's a lot of e-portfolios out there too that students like to use, whether it's like Google Site or there's certainly Google Apps, Apple Apps, and more recently the AAMC has partnered with a company called Pivia. We have no vested interest in this, but it certainly is a new option that they have that can go longitudinally from being a pre-med student, a medical student, to a resident, and documenting all your experiences and activities starting from point one as a pre-med student. Here's some tips about the work and activities section. When you're going to write these experiences, don't just give us the basics. Don't just write, I volunteered in a hospital for 3 hours a week. Go a little bit broader than that. If you volunteer for 3 hours a week, tell us what you got out of it. You weren't being paid for those 3 hours. Demonstrate some evaluation and reflection. Tell us what you did while you were there and what you took away from those experiences. You're given 750 characters in each one of these work and activities fields, so use it up. Don't just give us the basics. If you find that you're running out of room, if you need more than 15 slots, consolidate things. We don't need to know that you have 8 different slots filled with Dean's List. You can consolidate that. You can consolidate your honors and scholarships together. Shadowing experience is another thing to consider. If you have multiple shadowing experiences, consolidate those together. That way it gives you more room. But filling up all these does not make it better. We're big advocates of quality versus quantity. So, excuse me, don't feel like you have to fill all 15 up just with padding and filler. Make it really have punch to it. And above all, don't embellish or exaggerate your involvement or role. We can always contact an organization or advisor if it seems like kind of too good to be true or it sounds a little fishy. We can contact people. So, this is too high stakes to be kind of embellishing too much what your role may have been. Some additional tips about the work and activities section. Don't forget about those hobbies and interests. It's really nice to know that you actually have activities and interests outside of your academic career. It actually humanizes you to know that you like to collect music or that you like to exercise and play sports or you like musical instruments and things like that, or you taught yourself how to play guitar. We like knowing those things. It also kind of shows us too that you have some ways of blowing off steam when you have times of stress. Some of the things to consider, we've seen some really clever applicants include links to supplemental information. AMCAS and some of the other third-party sites that admissions offices use can be a little rigid, where that you can't, if you have a lot of artwork, you can't upload your artwork to it, or you can't include a video of your performance. So some students will include, say, a YouTube video, a link to it, so that we can see their breakdance performance or their concert performance. But just the words of warning here is be careful though, because as you know on YouTube, you can have comments on there. So if the comments are a little, dicey, you don't want that to reflect on you. Another common question we get is, what about high school activities? Can I include the high school activities on my AMCAS application? Generally, we say avoid that. Unless it's something really significant, like you did tons of shadowing hours as a high school student, or you received some type of major award or achievement. You were the state tennis champion. You were in the Scripps spelling bee as a high school student. That would be something I would say is worth noting, but otherwise stick to experiences that you had as an undergraduate student. So you've gone through the application process. AMCAS has verified your application. It's completed, submitted. It's sent to the medical schools, and you think you're done yet? Nope, you get secondary applications coming your way. And so once that primary arrives, usually medical schools will automatically send you out the secondary application. Some medical schools screen prior to sending the secondary. They do some pre-screening before they send it out, but I think most medical schools send the secondary applications out to all verified applicants. Keep in mind though, these are very school specific and they cost more money. Some things you're gonna be essayed to death. Some schools require 1 essay, maybe 0 essays, but some have up to 12. And it ranges everything from personal development or some type of life challenge you faced, or tell us about some research or scholarly work you may have completed. Why are you applying to their school? So again, going back to the documenting your experiences, this is where you might be able to draw from those old stories, incidences, moral, ethical dilemmas that you faced, and then use those as content for these future essays. And our tip here is don't cut and paste from different essays. If the question seems kind of close and you're like, well, it seems to, this question here from this school seems close to this one I'm working on right now from this other med school, don't cut and paste it. Take the time to write that essay out, because it's very important to the school. There's something they're really wanting to learn from you. And if it looks a little fishy or like it just doesn't answer the question properly, it might look like that you're cutting and pasting to save time. So just take the time to do it. And also, you want to project professionalism in this application process. Many schools will ask for a picture of you in their secondary application. This is not so that we can create the most glamorous med school class. This is so that we can put a face with a name. This is especially important when we go to admissions committees, because oftentimes when we're at admissions committees, we'll put a picture up on our computer screen, or schools put them up on big screens up on the wall. This is where we can kind of put a face with a name. When you're meeting 900 or 1,000 students, it's very helpful to put that picture there. But this is not the time to try to be cute or clever with your picture, or you don't need to have a mug shot either. You can smile. The one in the very end, there's a nice headshot. Just give us a nice picture of yourself. Also, the email address reflects on you. Choose an appropriate email address, not like absolute annihilation or hot blonde 22. Just keep it bland. First name, last name at mail provider. So, because that also reflects on your professionalism as well. And so keep those social networking sites cleaned up. I know some med schools that will troll through every Facebook page they can find, every Twitter account they can find that you're affiliated with. So I'm not saying that we do that, but I know some schools that will spend the time doing that. So keep that in mind. Clean that stuff up. Lock it down. And bottom line, all of your communications reflect on you. You send an email to an admissions office, it reflects on you. You send a letter to the admissions office, it reflects on you. So always use proper etiquette and keep that in mind, that schools are reading this, and this is how it's reflecting back on you as an applicant. So you've got these secondaries submitted. You're now being reviewed by medical schools. Many medical schools use holistic review. Holistic review is a way of weighing different components of the application, where schools can maybe place more value into a certain component of the application that's important to their school. Most schools are, like it says here, reviewing literally thousands of applications. So that's why you want to be submitting them early, so you're getting in front of our eyes early when we're nice and fresh in the summertime. And also, make yours easy to read. We read thousands of these day, afternoon, night, and so doing some of the stuff that I talked about to kind of clean up your personal statements, or adding some of those extra little tidbits to the experiences, can really make it easier to read and more enjoyable to read. And then, if luck comes your way, people like what they've read the letters of recommendation about you, they say you're a wonderful student, we think you're a wonderful student, you get invited for the interview. So this is where I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Mehta to kind of bring it home, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the interview and then from some other tips going forward.
Thanks, Christian. So as you go throughout your interview process, you will encounter many different types of interviews that will vary from school to school. You'll have one-on-one interviews, you may see panel interviews, you may see the MMI, the mini multi-interview, and you may see hybrids of these or various permutations on the theme. Regardless of the format, you should have done your homework. Don't show up on the interview day and be completely gobsmacked because there's an MMI or there's a panel interview. So make sure that you know information about the school before you show up on the interview day. Regardless of the format of the interview, we're all looking for similar things. Maybe getting at it in different ways, but in the end, we're all looking for such things as maturity, resiliency, the ability to collaborate, interpersonal skills, and emotional intelligence. Do your homework on the school before you show up. Treat it as a job interview. If you're applying for a big investment banking firm or a big consulting firm, I would imagine that you would do your homework on that company before you show up. So too should you do it about the school. If a student shows up at our school on interview day and doesn't know that we're a research-intensive school and doesn't know that small group learning is the main component of our educational process, then we figured that student's not that interested and they're just throwing out a bunch of applications to see what sticks. They weren't applying to us because we appealed to them. In addition, be informed about current events in medicine and relevant topics that are being discussed in the news. You certainly don't have to have read the entire 2,000-page document of the Affordable Care Act, but you should at least know that it exists. Read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or some other fairly reputable mainstream news source to keep you abreast of what's going on in current events. Practice being interviewed, but don't rehearse your answer. What do I mean by that? Don't memorize your answers. Don't throw something canned at us. It happens so frequently that we'll see somebody who's memorized answers, and when you ask them a question that wasn't exactly what they anticipate, they answer with their memorized response anyway. It comes across as disingenuous. But get practice being interviewed. Have your mom, your dad, your significant other, your roommate, a college professor, your advisor, whomever, ask you questions. And you get used to replying. Note any repetitive behaviors or speech patterns you may have. If you say, like, every other sentence or whatnot, or you play with your hair, or you fidget with your watch, or you slouch down in your chair every time somebody asks you something, observe those and try to modify those. They can all detract from your power as a candidate. Also, bring your own questions. By the time you get to the interview day, for all intents and purposes, you've been deemed academically competitive. So now you're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing you. Look for fit and where you'll fit in as a medical student. And of course, always laugh at the dean's jokes. That's a sure recipe for success. Moving on to a few commonly asked questions that we get. One is, what about the gap year? The gap year can be a wonderful, beautiful, fabulous thing. More and more students are taking it for many reasons, and more schools are really embracing what a wonderful thing it is, our school included. There's not one common question that we commonly get is, what do I need to do during my gap year? And this is where you need to reflect. Do you need some academic redemption? Do you want to do some research? Do you need to make some money before you get to med school and need to get a job? Do you want to travel because you know you'll never have that opportunity again if all goes according to plan? Think about what you need to do to enrich yourself, and if you have a latitude, take it as a gift and do what you want to do. Regardless what you choose to do that year, though, keep a little pinky toe dipped in the pool of medicine, either manifested as shadowing or volunteerism or some type of service. Another question we frequently get is that about post-baccalaureate programs versus masters. Now, they're actually two very different animals. Post-baccalaureate program is that typically reserved for career changers, somebody who had a different life previously or was a history or liberal arts major and still need to fulfill the basic prereq coursework. A master's program or special master's program is typically more for academic enhancement or redemption in somebody who's already had the prerequisite coursework but doesn't necessarily have a GPA which will make them competitive. Now, the difference is also with a post-baccalaureate, those grades get factored into your undergraduate GPA to give you a higher and stronger undergraduate GPA. For master's programs, those don't get factored in. So this is a snapshot at the bottom right hand of the screen from an actual candidate who matriculated with us 2 years ago. He was a career changer. He was an older student in the restaurant hospitality business. So his undergraduate record wasn't as glamorous and beautiful as we would have liked. He got an MBA at some point in his life, which you can see listed under all others, because he didn't have a core science coursework in that. Then he decided that med school was his next path, and he went to a post-baccalaureate program, in which he did very, very well, and which helped to bolster at least his science undergraduate GPA. Not the other two, but he had so many other redeeming factors that he's now a very successful medical student at our school. So, what if you don't get into medical school? Not to be a doomer gloomer here, but it happens, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. Last year, 42% roughly of the candidates who applied were accepted. Now, don't freak out about that number, because of the remainder who were not accepted, not all were competitive. Not all had been reflective. Not all had applied at the top of their game. There was much that they needed to do with their applications to be competitive. But what do you do if you're not accepted? Well, first off, take some time and lick your wounds, and then get advice. Talk to people. Talk to admissions officers. Talk to pre-medical advisors. Look at the AAMC.org. Look on StudentDoctor.net. Look around for information. Be honest with yourself and analyze your weaknesses. Was your GPA low? Was your essay not well written? Did you not perform well in the interview? Did you apply late? Take the time to improve the weaknesses in your application and reapply when we can see those improvements in your application. There's a lot of power in showing the redemption in your AMCAS application. If you apply while you're still working on improving these, they're not going to be as visible and you may not be as competitive. If you do wind up reapplying, write new essays. The content can be similar if it was something that was very meaningful to you, but it should be rephased in some way. The thinking is that you're a different candidate at that application than you were previously, so don't simply cut and paste. Give us some more reflection in your new essays. So let me summarize by saying that there's no magic formula to getting into medical school. People get into medical school every year. If you're organized, you slow down, you pace yourself, you pay attention to details, you're realistic, you dedicate the time, you're reflective, and you listen to advice, you too will be able to put on that white coat one day. So that is the end of our presentation. Christian, I'm going to get him on the line again, and then we can both answer whatever questions any of you may have come up with.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much. And again, just as a reminder to all of you listening, you can ask your questions in the question box on the right side of your screen. We'll get to as many of those as we can. Our first question asks, do advanced placement classes taken in high school count as college courses?
I'll address that one, Christian. Whatever credit your undergraduate institution gives to you for your AP credits, we'll give to you as well. That said, if you get AP in most of your sciences, of course you're going to want to take upper level sciences to show that you have the academic chops that it'll take to get you through medical school.
Okay, great. Next question asks, do you recommend that re-applicants talk about their time between application cycles in their personal statement? Is it okay if the re-application component is not the focus of the personal statement?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Absolutely. We're advocates of giving a nod that you're reapplying to medical school. In the MCAT application, we can see if you've applied to our medical school in the past, but if you haven't applied, it's not always evident. But sometimes there's some clues in the application that we can pick up on. It looks like they look like they're a reapplicant, but maybe they just didn't apply to us last time or previous cycles. So we think that it's important to give a nod that I am reapplying to medical school, but yeah, then talk about what's changed since then. What did you realize that maybe you didn't appreciate the first time around? It was the deadlines, or maybe it was I was too nervous in my interviews that I didn't practice enough, or I just didn't perform well in my interviews potentially. So I've tried to work on my communication skills and some of these newer activities that I've participated in since this new cycle. So you don't have to make it the entire focus of your personal statement, but I'd say give a nod to it.
I agree. I'd just give a quick nod to it. I would focus on your candidacy, who you are today, and just maybe give it a quick nod, but don't make it the focus of your essay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Next question, how many medical schools should someone apply to in order to have a healthy chance of getting in, assuming money is not the biggest issue?
The AAMC, I just got back from our national meeting, and 16 was the average number of schools to which students apply. I think any more than probably 20 is just you're diminishing returns and you're spending a lot of money. And probably fewer than 10 is too few. So I'd fall somewhere in that mid-teen region.
Although I would say that if you're from California, which they have thousands of pre-medical students,
yeah.
I've heard from some of our California students that they've applied to 25 schools, because there's only a handful of medical schools in the state of California, so many of them are applying out east, so they've had to increase that number. So just keep that, depending on where you're from, it might change the number of schools you're applying to.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Very good. Next, how many points should an applicant improve their MCAT score on the second time around when they're retaking it?
It's not a question of by how many points. It's a question of looking at what your score needs to be to make you competitive. So that's where I alluded to the AAMC data of average MCATs and GPAs for successful candidates. The average MCAT for successful matriculants last year nationally was about a 31.4. So it's not a question of how many points do you need to improve, but it's a question of where do you need to be to fall into the competitive range for the school of interest. You want to add anything there, Christian?
Yeah, I just was thinking that I really think the data in it hasn't moved, the needle hasn't moved too much in the last 5 years. It's been in the 30s, the like 31 range in the last 5 years. I think that tells you that you got to be cracking the 30s to be getting your foot in the door with medical schools. Certainly there's a range in all medical schools' incoming classes, but you're going to find, I think, that the average matriculating MCAT score is above a 31. And so I really think that that kind of drives home the point from the double AMC data and from matriculating class data. You got to be cracking the 30s for the
And
most
again,
part.
we're talking about allopathic medical schools, of course.
Yes, yes.
U.S. allopathic medical schools.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, our next question asks, do courses taken at an international college that were transferred to a U.S. college count?
Those grades typically do not get averaged in. It depends on what your undergraduate institution does. AMCAS does not average those grades in. So I would say typically they do not get counted.
Yeah, it depends on if your college counts it as credit. And they put it on their transcript.
So frequently colleges will give credits, but they may not average in the grade.
Yeah, it depends. It doesn't, the med schools have no say into that. The transcripts, you have them sent to AMCAS, and that's their process. So we just get the product on the back end. So it really comes down, sometimes I've heard of students petitioning to AMCAS saying, no, this was counted for credit and you should count it too, but that's an individual kind of case.
So you'll typically get the credits, they'll show up as you're having taken them, but the grades frequently don't get averaged in. We'll just see X's.
Okay. All right. This next person asks, I'm told non-traditional applicants are treated equally with traditional students. What about older applicants that are past their mid-40s? How are these applicants viewed?
We love non-traditional students at Case. I try to admit somebody older than me every year. It's getting harder, I have to tell you. But we don't focus on age. We look more on what you've done and why are you here today. Most schools, I think, are coming around to our frame of mind. We like the older student. You're here because you really want to be here. You've had another life. You're taking a risk. This is something that you really, really want to do, and you're going to get in there with all guns blazing and really get the job done. So I think most schools don't pay much attention to age as, who are you today and where are you going to go from here?
I find that some of our friends, and we do the same thing at other medical schools, we brag about our age range. Mm-hmm. We say, we have a 21, and our age range is 21 to 42. Like, somebody's 42. Oh, it's like, yeah, they're really cool and interesting. The non-traditional students, it's obvious you bring more to the table in an interview. We have more things to talk about, and so broader worldly experiences. And so I find that all med schools will kind of brag about their older students because they're usually incredibly interesting and have different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. And we like to have diversity in our classes, and that encompasses really every demographic, state of residence, racial, ethnic, educational background, life experiences. So we know you're going to learn far more from each other than you ever do from us. So the broader viewpoints that we can expose you to, the better off our students are going to be as future physicians.
Okay, great. And our next question, excuse me, I've been studying as a part-time student since the end of my junior year. Will that be problematic?
I wouldn't say it's going to be problematic. You just need to tell us your story and why you've been doing that. If you've had to work through school or you've had some financial burdens that we don't see with our typical candidates, then of course we're going to evaluate that in context. So it's not going to go against you as long as we can understand why that's happened and we can see that you had extenuating circumstances.
Yeah,
now,
just
if you were just laying at home and eating Cheetos and you just didn't feel like doing a full-time class load, of course that's a different story. But if we can see your story, then of course we're going to look at that with the context.
And that's where your personal statement, again, going back to what I said, can help connect the dots for us. Really put the context there.
Very good.
I don't have anything against Cheetos, by the way. I think they're delicious.
Our next question asks, what about optional essays on supplemental applications? How optional are they really?
Oh, is it a trick? Right.
Yeah. And
we have an optional essay on our secondary application. It says, tell us about anything that may not have been captured in the rest of the application. Students have been using that to give us additional information they couldn't put into a certain field in AMCAS, or they've had updates since they've applied, since they submitted their primary application, maybe something new's come up. Some students have been using it as a place to express extra interest in our school, or maybe some particular reason why they're applying to us. They have some kind of personal connection to Cleveland or to Case Western they want to share with us. So for a case, we really do look at it as optional. It's not a trick.
Yeah, we don't have a hidden agenda. Some students write, "I have nothing further, thank you for asking," or some students leave it blank. And that's okay. We really want our students to be able to tell us if there's something that they haven't been able to tell us. And we know that a lot of students worry that there's a hidden trick behind it. And we know a lot of schools have been asking about diversity. And we've seen a lot of students use our optional question as the diversity essay. So that's fine. It's not a hidden agenda for us, though. So I do hope and think that most schools ask questions not with a hidden agenda, but truly in the context of what they're asking.
Thanks. All right, next question says, when taking a gap year, when should you apply to med school? Before starting the gap year or after? If you apply before starting your gap year, should you send updates to the schools throughout that year?
So if you apply at the end of your gap year, then you're taking 2 gap years. So that's kind of up to you. Right? You apply the May of the year prior to matriculation. So if you apply at the end of your gap year, you're going to have a second gap year while you're interviewing and the application is in play. If you don't want those 2 gap years, then you apply at the beginning of that gap year. And if you want to send updates to school, you can. Some schools will not accept updates, others will. We prefer to get updates just from students who have been invited to interview or who have already interviewed, because otherwise we get deluged. But it's, if you got to look at the schools individually and see what their policies for updates are. And if they're willing, then by all means send them. And if anything, it just shows interest.
Mm-hmm.
Anything to add there, Christian?
Yeah, no, I think you captured. We share the same brain, so I was thinking the same things. But I mean, that you can always bring updates to an interview. I think if schools will not accept updates, then coming to the interview is an opportunity to bring and be prepared to talk about. Say, so I see you graduated in May of 2014. What are you doing this year? Well, then you should be prepared to kind of fill people in on what you're doing with your time as you're applying to medical school.
Very good. Our next question says, how are prerequisites taken at a community college looked on?
Again, that depends on the context. We are starting to see it more and more, and we're fully cognizant of the challenges that are intrinsic to getting those prereqs in and how difficult it can be. So if you give us the context, if we can understand your story and why you went to community college, fine, no problem. We're, of course, going to look at your upper-level science grades when you then transfer to a 4-year college for junior year to make sure that the rigor is something that you can still handle. Anything to contribute there, Christian?
No. Nope. You nailed it.
Very good. Our next question says, how about pass-fail classes? How would you view those?
I was thinking about that. I'm sure my brow crunches down when I see a science course that's pass-fail, especially a prerequisite. You kind of wonder, what's going on here? We do know that there are some universities that the first year of undergrad is kind of a pass-fail environment as kids get their kind of feet settled in and they're just getting off the ground. But if it's pass-fail for, I don't know, art history, I don't think I'd have a problem with that one course. But if it's pass-fail for biochemistry or pass-fail for organic chemistry, then you start to kind of scratch the side of your head and wondering, are they trying to protect their GPA? And so that's where I would just be very aware. But one course or 2 courses here and there that are non-science, I would say most schools probably don't have a problem with that. What do you think, Dr. Mehta?
Yeah, I agree. 1 or 2 and all others, i.e. the non-biology, chemistry, physics, and math, fine. 1 or 2, no biggie. But yeah, when we start to see science courses taking pass-fail, when we see a string of too many pass-fails, we start to wonder what someone's trying to hide.
Okay. Excuse me again, sorry. This question says, I am a veteran and I feel like a lot of my experience goes above and beyond the lives of the ordinary pre-med student. How do I talk about my experience without bragging?
I think that just telling us your story, what were your activities in the military? That stuff speaks for itself a lot of times. You'll have a lot of information or stories to share with us or reflections in the essays that you're going to get to submit to medical schools. In the stresses and the environments that you were in if you were deployed overseas are really compelling, and it shows the ability to demonstrate leadership and collaboration and teamwork and loyalty. And so I think that just be straightforward, and I think admissions offices can pull out of there, really appreciate the level of commitment and dedication that you had as a military member. Recently, we accepted a Navy SEAL, and he didn't brag too much in his application, but he wrote about the things he did as a member of the military. It speaks for itself.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing an increasing number of veterans applying to medical school, and our admissions committee is definitely keyed in to what unique attributes vets bring to the game. So state the facts, state what you did, and if you feel like it sounds a little braggy by just stating the facts, then so be it. And it may not be braggy. It just may be that your experiences are so unique, and that's just the only way that they can be presented.
Very good. All right, our next question asks, how does one record activities such as recreational skiing or activities for which you don't have verifiers?
So you can add that as one line item. Usually we see it down at the bottom, and it can be personal hobbies and interests. You can put yourself as the contact person, and you can put your own contact information. You can put in the years in which you engaged. It's a little bit looser when you put in personal hobbies. And you can lump them all together. If recreational skiing and bowling and basket weaving are your personal interests, you can lump them all together under personal hobbies or interests.
Okay, great. This, I think, will be our last question. What if you graduate in December and apply to medical school the following June? Is this considered a gap year?
No, it just means you graduated early.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon. Not uncommon. So take that time to, if you need to get a part-time job or, do some things you didn't have time to do as an undergrad, then use those 6 months or so to fill that in. But it's not considered a gap year.
No, you can eat Cheetos during that time too, along with something else. No, it's not considered a gap year. We see it all the time. People graduating in 3.5 years. So, that second semester, do whatever you think you need to do. Again, reflect on where you think you might have some areas that you'd either like to fill in, or is there anything that you've ever wanted to do that you'd like to do? Because again, once you get on that medical train, you may not get that opportunity again.
Very good. Well, I think that will wrap us up for this evening. Dr. Mehta and Christian, thank you so much for being here tonight. Thanks to all of you in the audience who took an hour out of your evening to spend with us. We really hope that this was helpful to you. A couple of quick notes before we close. First, if we didn't get to your question, we're going to be posting a list of the unanswered questions in the pre-med forums on studentdoctor.net. And there, both the Case Western admissions crew and others will be able to jump in there and answer and discuss those questions. So hopefully you guys can all get your questions answered. Second, if you want to hear any of this again or to share it with somebody else, we'll be posting it on the Student Doctor Network YouTube channel in the near future. You can also see all of our previous webinars on the YouTube channel, see some of the other people that we've talked to. You can subscribe on YouTube or follow us on Facebook or Twitter for updates on when this webinar is available. And I guess that brings us to a close this evening. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great night.